So this is the second session of the day, and we're going to be showing different topics. Diana and Mark are going to give you the background and the story of where these policy briefs and this training program is coming from. But today, in this session 2, we're going to be focusing on these 3 topics that we can see below. First, we're going to discuss the policy priorities for conserving and restoring peatlands in South America. Then we will focus on engaging women, indigenous peoples, local communities, and youth in peatland restoration. And finally, restoring mountain peatlands for biodiversity and climate resilience with very exciting case studies from South America, from the Andes and from the Himalayas. So that's how the session of today will look like. And I can also quickly discuss how the agenda will go. So right now we are exactly on time. We're going to be first starting with some welcome remarks from Diana Kopansky, the coordinator of the Global Peatlands Initiative within UNEP. Then Mark from Scotland Royal College and Rosie from the Institute for Methods Innovation will give an overview of the evidence synthesis training approach. Then we will have a 7-8 minute presentation for each of these topics. We will also have a 2-3 minute Q&A. But also at the end of the session, we will have 10 minutes to also address these questions, these answers, and to start an open discussion. And anybody, please feel free to participate. And throughout the entire webinar, please use the chat to ask specific questions you might have. And at the end, Diana will give some closing remarks. So, yeah, I think we are on time. So I'm gonna hand it over to Diana to start with the background and the objectives of the GPI and the research working group. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Patrick. And I saw my lucky number 27 start, which will cue me up to say a warm welcome to everyone. My name is Diana Kopansky, and I have the honor to lead the Global Peatlands Initiative on behalf of the United Nations Environment Program. And GPI, the Global Peatlands Initiative, is organizing this webinar series to showcase 6 peatlands evidence synthesis policy briefs. And these were developed with IMI and Scotland's Royal College and nearly 50 trained peatland researchers as part of our evidence synthesis and policy engagement program. The Global Peatlands Initiative has a number of core pillars, and science and knowledge generation are at the heart of it. And with the research helping us understand where peatlands are and understanding how they're changing, and also understanding how they can be effectively protected, conserved, and sustainably used, and who needs to be involved in that process. So on our journey over the last 10 years almost, the Global Peatlands Initiative Research Working Group, co-led by UNEP and the Scotland's Royal College, that's myself, and co-chaired by myself and Mark Reed. We've been connecting global researchers in order to synthesize peatland science, to also identify funding opportunities, to build capacities, and translate evidence into policy and action, and also to build a community that's knit together these diverse perspectives from different disciplines, from different stakeholders, and also from different forms of knowledge. The second area that we work on is policy and practice, and that is central to our Global Peatlands Initiative mission. We're emphasizing the need that scientific evidence be used to inform and enable this development of any national peatland policies, programs, and plans, also global peatlands policies and plans, and to ensure that any action is sustainable and aligned with the overarching goal and vision of the GPI partnership. The policy briefs highlight some of the global and regional peatland policy developments, and they support as well with the mobilization of action by enabling people to think about ways to accelerate, to think about through using lessons and cases shared today, and also to unlock resources aligned with our Global Peatlands Initiative objectives. So this webinar continues to help to strengthen the skills and our network of researchers, which are capable to deliver rapid evidence synthesis to support more, better, and locally derived evidence needed to support decision-making and thereby strengthening ultimately this peatland science and policy interface. The briefs are living outputs, and so feedback from the governments, scientists, and practitioners are always welcome. And they'll be key to continue to strengthen our skills and approaches as a global community so that we can continually improve policy relevance and improve our work, transdisciplinary work together, and ultimately the impact of the work by making it locally appropriate, globally informed, and science-based. Thanks so much. I'm going to pass now to Mark to tell us a little bit more about the training program. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Diana. So I'm a professor and research centre director at Scotland's Royal College. I co-chaired the research working group with Diana. And over the years, as we've worked with researchers from multiple disciplines around the world, there has been a growing awareness of, first of all, the importance of evidence synthesis to make better decisions, as Diana's said, but also the lack of knowledge and skills across the sector to be able to do this kind of gold standard evidence work. And so this program was designed to skill up researchers around the world who work in peatlands from different disciplines in being able to write evidence syntheses to a publishable level, but also to turn them into policy briefs and to ensure that what we were doing was as relevant as possible to live issues in the policy community. We derived the questions for these syntheses from a survey of peatland policymakers by the Peat Quest project. And so what you are going to be hearing today is the outcome of that research. And there are accompanying policy briefs to help communicate this. So I'm looking forward to this. Rosie, tell us a bit more about the breadth of expertise that's gone into this.
Yes, hi everyone. Hope you can hear me all right. So if you have the next slide, please. Part of the evidence synthesis training is we wanted to engage as many people from across the world. So we were able to engage 42 people from across the world, as you can see in this map, including some of the GPI's key country partners, such as Ecuador, which was a fantastic opportunity to bring together a range of experience and expertise around peatland knowledge and sharing that knowledge as teams. As part of that, the evidence synthesis training and its online platform was about inclusivity and trying to engage people not just within the academic sector, but also across the practitioner sector as well. So we had some fantastic experiences from people who work within on the ground peatland restoration and not just from we had a very good gender split, and actually we had about 80% of people were early career researchers. So really trying to engage the up and coming expertise that's coming through the peatland community at the moment. So thank you, everyone. It's been a fantastic experience.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, Mark, Diana. And sorry, I think I didn't introduce myself, but I'm gonna be moderating. My name is Patrick Schell, and I'm supporting the Global Peatlands Initiative team under the UN Environment Program. And yeah, so I'm gonna supporting with the moderation, and we're gonna start with team number 4. We're gonna start with this topic, and we have an international team with environmental NGO and academic researchers here in the field of peatland conservation and management from Ecuador, from USA, Canada, and Uganda. And we're going to talk about policy priorities in South America. So I hand it over to team number 4. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. That would be me. My name is Adam Kirkwood, and I'm going to be presenting on behalf of Group 4 today. I'm a peatland biogeochemist with about 9 years of experience working in boreal peatlands in Canada, focusing on mercury and carbon cycling, and I am in Ottawa, Canada. I'm presenting today on behalf of my co-authors, who are Paul Julian from the Everglades Foundation, who's a wetland ecologist that specializes in biogeochemistry in Florida's Everglades. And Paul's really interested in providing science-based policy insights for restoration and water management. I'm also presenting on behalf of Carol Kagaba Karumba, who's an environmental scientist that specializes in wetland science and management in the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda. And she's involved in peatlands assessment, mapping, restoration, and directly involved in the country's policy processes. And finally, we worked with Braulio Lawate, who's a hydrologist that specializes in Andean peatlands. So he brought a lot of great knowledge to our work on looking at peatlands in South America. And Braulio studies the role of peatlands in water regulation and yield at the catchment scale, using a combination of modeling and field measurements. So that's a little bit about us, and now I'm excited to talk about our work on policies and priorities for conserving South American peatlands. So, what we know is that South America has a really wonderful diversity of peatlands, and they span approximately 630 kilometers squared across the continent, and they range from coastal all the way up to high elevation peatlands. And we understand that they hold vast amounts of carbon, but so far this carbon content is relatively under-quantified across the continent. And so we wanted to better understand how the carbon functions of peatlands in South America are responding to climate change. And to do that, we used Web of Science and Scopus to search for literature related to peatland decomposition and proxies of decomposition, so greenhouse gas flux studies or any other studies that could be used to inform model development for predicting how peatlands are affected by climate change or may be affected by climate change in South America. So with these search results, we found 482 papers, and after going through our inclusion exclusion criteria and our title and abstract searches, we had about 272 papers. When we went through these, we found that less than 1% of these papers reported decomposition rates directly, which was kind of the original question of our research group. But after seeing this, we kind of figured we had to pivot a little bit, so it's not exactly the first question we set out to answer. So when we dove into all of the papers to look at how climate change is affecting decomposition or proxies of decomposition, so there was a slide showing a figure of, or a histogram of the studies and where they are in a range of elevation. And what we saw is that there's a pretty good diversity of studies looking at coastal peatlands up to mid-elevation peatlands, up to high elevation peatlands above 4,000 meters. And we kind of see some clear contrasts in how high elevation and low elevation peatlands are responding to climate change. So in low elevation peatlands, you can picture I have a big carbon dioxide and a big methane bubble, indicating that in lower elevation peatlands, we do have greater amounts of carbon dioxide and methane emissions. Whereas in my kind of high elevation box, we have very small bubbles indicating lower carbon dioxide and methane emissions. Pivoting back to low elevation peatlands, what we found is that generally I kind of have like a figure that just has a slight upgoing arrow with a positive trend, indicating that low elevation peatlands are generally more resistant to short-term changes in hydrology and temperature. So they're able to buffer changes a little bit better compared to high elevation peatlands, where we see more rapid responses of changes in hydrology and temperature. So we kind of see like a stronger positive trend once peatlands and high elevations are disturbed. And the final thing that we saw from the contrast is that low elevation peatlands are more vulnerable to changes in land use, whether through deforestation, drainage, or fire, but they have better buffering capacity on a short term, whereas high elevation peatlands more vulnerable to warming and drying, and even very small perturbations can trigger large carbon losses. And so now I can come to this slide. And because of those differences that we see, the carbon functions of high and low elevation peatlands are quite different. So it is important that we have tailored management and policy strategies as necessary. So overall, it's very important that both high and low elevation peatlands are conserved and are prioritized. I'm not suggesting prioritizing one over the other, but what the actual policies might look like would be different. So for high elevation peatlands, because they are so sensitive, like I've just mentioned, we suggest that they can be used as sentinels of climate change. And as a result, enhanced monitoring might be justified in high elevation peatlands. For low elevation peatlands that are more subject to direct anthropogenic impacts, we suggest there might be more of an emphasis on land use management policies, including the avoidance of peatlands during development, in addition to restoration and rewetting. Okay, and our final kind of summary based on the gaps we identified in our knowledge during our rapid evidence assessment, we suggest the following three high-level policy actions. So the first is recognizing peatland diversity. So as just discussed, if this is recognized in policy, we can produce policies kind of specific to how things are actually changing along this elevational gradient. Second is establishing a peatland monitoring network. So there are clear data gaps both spatially and temporally for how peatlands are responding to climate change in South America, and establishing a coordinated monitoring network of both field observations and remote sensing observations could fill key knowledge gaps for how peatlands are responding to contemporary climate change. And finally is strengthening the connection between science, policy, and practice. So integrating science-derived data with indigenous knowledge, with land tenure, community management practices, so that we can ensure that science is informing equitable and effective peatland policy action. So that is everything for us. I thank you for this opportunity to do this work and talk about it today. And I'm happy to answer any questions. And my colleague Paul is here as well, who can also help with the questions if needed. Thank you.
But otherwise, well, I can quickly ask a question. I'm specifically interested in the decomposition rates. I actually focused my master's thesis on measuring the composition rates of biomass in different types of peatlands and fens specifically.
Amazing.
But in general, Adam, Paul, so if you can think about different, of course, we always have so many knowledge gaps. I'm specifically interested in the decomposition rates, but if we would have funding that we could use to boost research, do you think having more people studying this specifically, the balance between the decomposition rates, which proxies affect decomposition versus which proxies also affect biomass accumulation? But do you think this would be an important source to focus on, or do you consider there's more relevant maybe knowledge gaps that we could address funding towards too?
Sure, I can take a stab at that. I think it depends on what the end goal is, and I think my perception of why it's important to understand decomposition rates is it can use us to help inform models that we can predict how peatlands will respond to climate change. And good decomposition rates are very important for that in terms of understanding carbon accumulation through time. So I would say if that is one of the key goals, which I do think is an important and relevant goal, I do think establishing research on decomposition rates is important, especially kind of the spatial variability of decomposition and understanding how decomposition rates would vary in this diversity of peatlands in South America.
Yeah, I'll follow up with that, and I agree. Adam covered it great, and I think it's all context dependent too. So decomp rates for decomp rates' sake is one thing, but having it within the context of, say, changing climate or landscape position also really matters as well, to inform those models, because of those are all factors that probably most likely play into regulating those rates. And then of course that's kind of the why and the how. And then I guess the other component of that is the what's next? What happens to decomposition of peat? What's being released? How is it being released, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that's kind of why we went down the proxy route a little bit as well, is, the end goal of decomp is what? It's usually carbon flux of some form. And so that also is really important as well. So definitely, focusing funding on that would be probably a good idea.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adam, Paul.
Thank you.
I also see a very good question on the chat, but it's directly linked to the next topic. Thank you, Diana, for translating, and thank you, Gabriel, for asking. So we're gonna start with team number 5, and maybe at the end of this presentation, they can answer that question, which is related to the role of local communities being involved in peatland action and restoration. So first, I'm gonna introduce the team. We have an international team of researchers from Chile, UK, Ireland, Uganda, India. We also have someone from Kazakhstan. And yeah, so it's exciting because we're going to focus on the role of indigenous peoples, local communities, and also engaging with women and youth in peatland restoration action. So I leave it up to you to discuss more about this topic. So over to team number 5. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Can everybody hear me okay? Just a thumbs up.
Yes, it's perfect.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone from Dublin. I just wanted to start by thanking everyone at the Institute for Methods Innovation, at UNEP's Global Peatland Initiative, the supporting universities, and just in particular to Rosie for all her support as we conducted this work. My name is Lily Toomey. I'm an environmental historian based in the Trinity Centre for Environmental Humanities in Trinity College, Dublin. And I'm delighted to be speaking here on behalf of my team, whose affiliations you can see here on the screen: Daniela Ortegon, Drew Verma, Melissa Felipe Cadillo, Nicole Puchel, Jirka Janak Metzaki, and our former team members who still contributed so much to the work: Gabriela Rebello Quatra, Julius Ariaple, and Matthew Adelier. So I am presenting the results of our rapid evidence assessment that was focused on engaging Indigenous peoples and local communities in peatland restoration. So just some background to our REA. We began from the perspective of the growing research that shows Indigenous or community-based management initiatives are crucial for protecting ecosystems and their biological diversity. And this is true for peat-forming systems, especially considering that 27% of global peatlands sit on Indigenous lands or territories. Engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities has therefore been identified as a critical factor for successful peatland management. These groups are often the primary stewards of these landscapes, possessing experiential ecological knowledge, long-standing management practices, and strong cultural connections to local resources. So this growing body of evidence indicates that bottom-up community-led approaches to sustainable peatland management outperform top-down interventions. Things like participatory decision-making, co-design or restoration strategies, and community-based monitoring facilitate pathways to local ownership as well as adaptive management. And so with all of this in mind, we set about developing our approach to the REA so that we could capture meaningful evidence about the potential opportunities and limitations of policies that engage Indigenous peoples and local communities in sustainable peatland management. And I'd just like to state here at the outset that while we had hoped to generate some more specific results and conclusions about the participation of women and youth groups, there was limited data available in the literature. So just to say that the focus today is more specifically on Indigenous peoples and local communities. Okay, so our objectives were to identify strategies for engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities. And initially we had hoped to assess their reported effectiveness, although the literature yielded fewer results about efficacy than we would have hoped for. And we further wanted to identify challenges and knowledge gaps around Indigenous peoples and local communities' engagement in peatland governance, with the ultimate aim of generating evidence to inform policy decisions and programming. And so just some information about our REA. We conducted our rapid evidence synthesis of peer-reviewed literature from 2010 to 2024 in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, sort of to reflect the global perspectives of our team. Our initial search yielded 64,397 records, which we screened first by accepting only the top 200 results from each database, then title and abstract level screenings, and then finally a more in-depth screening from which we accepted 48 high-quality records for the final assessment. The geographical scope of these results, which I hope you can all see on our map here on screen, it might be a little bit faint, but essentially we reported the highest number of initiatives in Indonesia that accounted for about 39% of the results, with others including Ecuador, Colombia, Ireland, and Malaysia. So our analysis of the papers showed that more limited engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities is associated with weaker restoration outcomes, while collaborative multi-actor governance arrangements correlate with stronger ecological and social results. We isolated engagement approaches that had been implemented most frequently, which included co-design or co-creation, participatory decision-making, incorporation of traditional knowledge, community-based monitoring, capacity building or training programs, financial incentives, and awareness-raising campaigns. And our analysis suggests that the integration of Indigenous and local knowledge not only enhances legitimacy and the place-based or contextual relevance of restoration strategies, it also enables community self-organization to strengthen the long-term sustainability of these interventions. Next slide, please. Sorry, thank you. So in thinking about some of the challenges associated with these measures, as well as the gaps in the research, we found that financial constraints, or more specifically, the lack of long-term financing, to be a really significant barrier in implementation. Furthermore, weak communication and feedback between government agencies, scientific institutions, and communities limited the capacity of stakeholders overall to implement sustainable management strategies. As well as this, inconsistent policies across different organizations often lead to incoherent or less robust measures. And then in terms of the limitation of the available research, we found, as I mentioned, there's a significant geographical bias towards tropical regions, specifically Southeast Asia, leaving non-tropical peatlands somewhat underrepresented in the literature. Within the studies that we reviewed, the participation of Indigenous peoples and local communities can often be seen as more of a symbolic rather than a core part of project planning. And then finally, the lack of standardized frameworks to measure the effectiveness of engagement meant that often these studies were more speculative on the outcomes of engagement mechanisms. So ultimately, there seems to be a general consensus in the literature that engaging with Indigenous peoples and local communities in sustainable peatland management is worthwhile, but there's just as yet limited research that attempts to measure or quantify these claims. And so the implications of this for policy and practice, from the results of our REA, we can make some broad recommendations. So we would encourage a transition from more consultation-based models of engagement to co-design and co-governance of peatlands between institutions and Indigenous people and local communities. That also includes the systematic integration of multiple knowledge systems. Depending on the context, also, we see the formal recognition of land and resource rights as a foundation for participation. Similarly, financial mechanisms like grants or investments should be more closely aligned with local livelihood priorities. And then finally, in response to the research gaps we identified, we recommend the development of standardized frameworks to evaluate participation and outcomes. So as we state here, we recommend a transition from instrumental participation that sees engagement with Indigenous peoples and local communities as more of a symbolic gesture towards more meaningful knowledge co-production and shared governance of peatlands. I'm sorry, I know on time I'm on the final slide, so next slide, please. Thank you. So just to reiterate our key takeaways, participation is a determinant of restoration effectiveness, not simply an auxiliary factor. Power relations, knowledge hierarchies, and institutional structures shape peatland outcomes. And finally, future peatland governance must prioritize inclusive, rights-based, and place-based approaches. Yeah, thank you all for your time. And happy to answer any questions. I think Drew and Melissa, there's some other team members here, so happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Lily. So yeah, we would have 1-2 minutes in case there's a direct question. Well, so first of all, the question that Gabriel had asked, I think it's very well answered of the different role of how local communities can be considered, unless you want to add anything else. But also there's a question from Mark, asking what would you say to governments or agencies who say this is not realistic with current resources? So if anybody from the team would like to answer this question.
Anyway, I'm happy to, I'm not sure, yeah, give some kind of an answer. It's a big question, I suppose. I mean, I think looking to the examples that we already have of situations where this is working, they're still limited, small scale, but I think even investments of limited resources to smaller projects then can develop and grow out into bigger projects. I mean, it would be fantastic to see resources being directed towards these kinds of engagement mechanisms rather than, at least the case in Ireland, the standard policy seems to be giving contracts for building data centers and things like that. Like the policies need to be redirected towards this kind of work. I think the resources are there, but maybe they could be, redirected.
Thank you. And yes, Diana? And also then we have Drew.
Let me let Drew speak first, and then I can share a little bit of the example on a few sort of co-designed programs that the Global Peatlands Initiative has been involved in. Drew,
Thank you. So over to
pass to
you.
you.
Yeah, no, just to answer or just to add what Lily said, I think resources, from our experience, I think resources are really not an issue. If you look at, let's say, peatlands or any other ecosystem, I think we need to establish, the convergence with different sectors, be it livelihood, be it climate change, water resources, even sectors like tourism and all. And I think if the agenda is made more holistic and comprehensive for other sectors, I think the resources is really not an issue. It's just, I think, the messaging part. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Drew. So before we pass on to the next team, Diana, would you like to quickly add any remark?
Yeah, I'd love to compliment that, because I think that this is also why our work here as a Global Peatlands Initiative Research Working Group about interdisciplinarity, it doesn't necessarily mean that people don't want to work together, but it's the how. And, we have the luxury of also bringing those networks together because we know how effective and efficient it is when people can exchange peer-to-peer. So that's why also the work that the Global Peatlands Initiative does peer-to-peer beyond the research working group is really impactful. And some of the work we've been involved in is the Can Peat project, which actually braids Indigenous knowledge, decision-making, and deep science, deep knowledge and approaches to science and observation that the Indigenous communities have been documenting through stories, also through more modern approaches of creating apps for monitoring, but also sharing their observations and knowledge. So I think that UNEP has also done a few assessments where we had a piece on coastal permafrost. We did a science piece with our partner Grid Arundel. And we did also an Indigenous perspectives knowledge piece. So I think that more and more people are understanding that there's different ways of knowing, and then bringing this more closer to decision makers, whether they're policymakers, researchers, or practitioners, is really quite vital. Thanks, love.
Thank you, Diana. So we're moving on to the next team. So thank you, Lily. Thank you, Drew. So Diana mentioned several resources, and we can send a follow-up email with a link to all of these resources. So we can start with the last team with topic number 6. And here we have a very diverse group with researchers from India, Peru, Ecuador, Ireland, Germany, and Cameroon. And we're going to be discussing, we're going to be sharing case studies and best practices for improving mountain peatland restoration focused on biodiversity and climate resilience as well. But over to you, anybody from team 6.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here. Thank you to the GPI, UNEP, and the Institute of Methods Innovation for this opportunity. So we know peatland degradation is threatening peatland biodiversity globally, and we know restoration can help reverse this, but there are major gaps in our understanding, especially when it comes to biodiversity outcomes in the Andes and Hindu Kush Himalayas. So our study targets these two regions, and the title is Restoring Mountain Peatlands for Biodiversity and Climate Resilience in the Andes and Hindu Kush Himalayas, or HKH for short. And before you can see the team who carried this rapid evidence assessment with broad expertise from 6 different countries. Our main topic was the impact of peatland restoration on biodiversity. And to refine our search words, we invited Andean and Himalayas experts to recommend papers and reports on our topic, which we used to build our search terms. Then we screened 2,603 records using 2 search strategies. So for the Andes and Himalayas, we included all available publications, including peer-reviewed and gray literature without time restrictions. And for the Andes, we did a Spanish search as well. To add broader context, we searched publications from 2015 to 2025 on other mountain regions of the world, which we call our global search. And our main inclusion criteria was mountain peatlands dominated by reeds, sedges, grasses, or cushion plants. So for the results, we found that 24 studies met the inclusion criteria, 13 from the Andes, 3 from the Himalayas, and 8 from other mountain regions. Together, these studies documented 33 distinct restoration interventions across 12 countries, as you can see in the map. The next slide, please. So for the main findings, on the graph on the left, we identified 9 drivers of peatland degradation. Overgrazing in orange was predominant in the Andes and Himalayas, as well as worldwide, but more prominent in both regions. The relevance of overgrazing in these 2 regions underscores a strong link between local livelihoods and peatland health in those regions. For the graph on the right, the restoration strategies were identified and are shown here on the x-axis per region. So they fell broadly into 3 categories: the hydrology-focused strategies, which is restoring water table levels; the biodiversity-focused strategies, which are reintroducing native vegetation, excluding livestock, or directly improving habitat conditions; and finally, passive restoration. So we also categorize biodiversity outcomes, which is shown in the y-axis, and scored each of them as increase, decrease, no change, reported without score in the colors, as you can see there. And in our graph, the most popular biodiversity outcome was increase in desirable plant species. Generally, 91% of the interventions reported improvements in at least one biodiversity measure. So this study revealed key knowledge gaps and informed our research and policy recommendations. So we found that there's limited but growing research in the Andes and Himalayas, and we need coordinated research networks and open data platforms to facilitate exchange between mountain restoration initiatives, to harmonize methods, fill evidence gaps, and guide policy and investment decisions. If you are doing research and finding out about this work, we do recommend to do the search in local languages. I'm not sure if there's a question. I'm hearing a question. I don't think so. Okay. The second one is that we found a lack of agreed standardized biodiversity outcomes of peatland restoration. And we believe that it is important to develop agreed metrics and standards to evaluate and compare biodiversity restoration outcomes with that will enhance reporting and tracking progress. We also found a lack of studies that include fauna. Most of it is focused on flora. So we do believe that it is important to include peatland fauna and microbial communities in restoration objectives. There's also lack of reference site identification, which goes against most suggested protocols for restoration. And we believe that establishing local reference sites and key indicator species will enable restoration targets to reflect natural conditions and also support consistent evaluation of progress across projects and regions. Next slide, please. So there is also a limited long-term monitoring. Most studies evaluate short-term recovery, and we do think that implementing long-term monitoring programs to capture slow ecological processes and also verifying the long-term sustainability of restoration outcomes is important. Finally, we found that the peatland conservation and restoration is not present in national and climate and biodiversity commitments. So we do think that it is important to integrate mountain peatlands into the MBSAPs, NDCs, and national adaptation plans, which recognize the vital role in supporting biodiversity and climate resilience. So for more information about this study, you can visit our preprint here using the QR code. And I also leave you with the main author's contact should you have any questions. And I am happy to answer any questions. And I also invite my team mates to answer any questions who are present here.
Yeah, I loved Mark's comment in the chat. So if people haven't seen the chat, please do read it. There's a lot of dynamic work going on here, and working with partners like the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, with upcoming funding from the International Climate Initiative and the German Ministry of Environment. UNEP is going to be trying to fill some of this gap on mountain peatlands in the Andes region. We also see a number of our other partners really coming into the space and also looking at what measures, what metrics and what methods are really important to unlock the funding to enable people to do this work. And Mark, if no one else has raised their hand, can you explain a little bit more about that work that you're doing on the Peatland Code? Thanks so much.
Yeah, so there are biodiversity markets that exist internationally, but the problem is that they are very generic because they're designed to work across any habitat, any focal species. And so we looked at applying them in the UK and concluded that they lacked the level of rigour that we would want to see, given the uniqueness of peatland habitats. And so we've gone through a process of developing a metric in terms of the different sort of structural and species level indicators you might want to see, and then populating that with much more specific things that you would look for in a good condition blanket bog habitat in the uplands of the UK. In terms of extending that to other peatland habitats in the UK, more work required. And of course, if you want to apply that to a different international context, then you would need to, again, to recalibrate that in terms of the indicators you would look for. But I think there's a template, I guess, for a rigorous approach to developing these what you're describing here as agreed metrics and standards, and that's been developed for the market. But I think whether it's for a market purpose or just to be able to compare across, I think similar kinds of things are needed for policy and market purposes.
Thank you, Mark, for that. I find it really interesting, and I would be interested in developing that for the Andean region. I don't know. I don't want to speak about for my teammates, but maybe they are also interested in something similar. Yeah, so maybe I'll contact you separately to learn a little bit more about what the Peatland Code is doing regarding this.
Great, and it because there's this fabulous growing community, please do spread it around, right? Spread it to your networks, bring in others. We have some of our great core Global Peatlands Initiative research working group members here. Inabushi, we see you. We appreciate you from Japan on the line late. And we know that this knowledge transfer from around the world, but also intergenerational, is so critical for cracking the nut on peatlands and, you know, the problem that we're facing with climate, water and pollution, nature loss. And by working together, we can really push this forward. So there's a lot of work, in case you're new to this space, there's a lot of research work that's been recorded, some training that's been recording, some of the early work that Mark had co-led and developing sort of core core outcome sets
the
so
main
that
set?
every, core common outcome sets. Yeah, so there's a lot of resources. If you're new to the space, please do have a look. And the Global Peatlands Initiative website offers a great space, as well as the YouTube channel, but also the on data sets. The World Environment Situation Room now includes free for everyone to download and interact with the results of the first State of the World's Peatlands, which was published 2022. And some of these more deeper dives into the topics that you're sharing here, some of these results are also echoed and supported through cases and content in the Global Peatlands Assessment, including those summary for policymakers and that policy chapter that Mark Reed had coordinated its writing of. Let me pause now. I'm not sure if we have more questions in the chat, but please do feel free. This is an open space. Take your microphones off, put your cameras on, and share something about what you've been doing or what you know is emerging and new in the corner of the world that you work in. And if not, please do join us in the Global Peatlands Initiative Research Working Group to share more at a future date.
I do have a comment. Should I just go ahead?
Yes, please do. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that we didn't present in our summary here was that we did find also that there was low stakeholder inclusivity in the documents that we reviewed. I don't know if it's not a practice to common practice to report that in a scientific paper, for example, but we did find that, and it kind of connects, and I really liked it because it connects to the former group's presentation. I think it's really cool how these groups are connecting information and information that is being validated through other searches, right? So I think that that's really interesting and kind of confirms some things that we've been seeing from the other groups' information. Yeah.
I jump in on just to remark on your point, Maria. I think what was interesting about our team's topic and sort of subject matter is that it does weave through all of the other research that all the other groups have been looking at as well. And particularly, I suppose, I noticed Drew made a remark in the comments about this, but if we're approaching peatlands policy from a very scientific perspective and wanting to make well and informed policy recommendations, how do we also then prioritize the other ways, as you said, Diana, the other ways of knowing peatlands? And so it's been really incredible to be a part of, well, I can only speak for my team, but having these perspectives from a global community of researchers allows us to make different prioritizations in ways that we know our own national governments maybe don't, or to just sort of like change the paradigm around how we value peatlands and knowledge about them. So that's all. Thanks.
No, it's very true, because I think it's when you link as well. I've had the honor of working around the world for a very long time in my career, and it's just absolutely valuable to talk to people wherever their expertise lies. And I think that that's what we're seeing is this really amazing crowdsourcing. And as we move toward crowdsourcing of knowledge, crowdsourcing of content, and as we move to an era where we have AI and more of these artificial intelligence mining and looking for content, the louder the voices of truth and that are out there can be, and the more connected we can be on topics that matter, both from different ways of knowing and different knowledges, the better. So that's also what we're doing at UN Environment Program, but also in the Global Peatlands Initiative, by really trying to braid through and bring the different voices and ways of knowing into our pieces of work. It's something that we've very much value and appreciate. And we're seeing more and more governments, and we're seeing more and more organizations seeking that as well, because we know that that's that long-term impact from these connections, both intergenerational, but also interdisciplinary. I like your question. Would you have the question in the chat?
We have a question in the chat. I can read it aloud.
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
from Professor Inubushi. Just some minor comments on gap list in the last slide. So I can also share it. So why missing flora besides fauna and microbial communities? Flora will be more attractive for visitors, an important point for conservation, restoration. So any reply from Maria?
Yeah, so I think the gap that we identified is that most restoration projects are aimed to improve flora, whether it's vegetation cover, desirable plant species. And so we do believe that it is important to also put in the objectives of restoration to include microbial communities and fauna, and consider that as well. And I agree with you, Inubushi, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name. Flora is definitely more attractive for visitors, and so I agree. And honestly, when you do any type, like the fastest, most like common restoration that happens is water table levels, and as soon as that happens, flora, I think, is the first thing that sort of like reacts to that change, right? So I agree with that. It's definitely more visual. It's very visual, but there are a lot of ecological processes that depend on microbial communities and other fauna that are also important to take into account, and that's what we're thinking. It is important also to put them in the I guess objectives in certain cases, not always. It's a case by case dependent situation. I don't know if that answers your question. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. So we are reaching the end of the hour, so we can move with the closing remarks. I'm sharing my screen and letting Diana close the session. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone. There's this interplay which we see very interesting across the science community, spaces and species. And when people come to the table with this expertise on wildlife or species, they quite often forget about this critical aspect of spaces, of ecosystems, of ecology. And I think it is about having many at the table, many voices, many experiences, where we're really going to get this impact at scale. If we stay in our lanes, then we also, unfortunately, are not going to advance as quickly together. So really a warm note of gratitude from everyone here, from the Global Peatlands Initiative and UNEP. And also thank you so much, Rosie, Mark, and Patrick for coordinating it. But most of all, thanks to those young, dynamic, diverse, and experienced researchers that came together in this really cool experiment of evidence synthesis. But we know, we've seen it works. We've seen it works, and we see more and more demand for it. So really hoping to get this continued feedback from those on this call, but others, so that we can build out this program, as Mark has shared in the comments. We're trying to really build this program to strengthen policy relevance and impact. We'll be publishing these compilation of the peatland policy briefs for you. And we're also going to be driving towards on this impact work. We're working with our partners and also sister projects like the Wet Horizons to embed these policy findings into national impact plans to really help to secure scale, continuity, and alignment with the GPI vision, and bringing on those that have not been involved in the work before. So do reach widely in your networks and join. And we're also going to be expanding this training program for the peatland researchers interested in evidence synthesis. So you can access the online training through the link there. And we really wanted to also welcome anyone, whether you're a researcher, a policymaker, a practitioner, or just a passionate individual that knows and wants to learn more about peatlands. You're welcome to join our Global Peatlands Initiative Research Working Group. It's open and you can be invited for future training opportunities. You can also be invited to join collaboratively in consortia, and we crowdsource some thinking around funding opportunities to really also to acknowledge that when we do compete with each other for funding, it unsettles the sort of network. And instead, what we try to do is we trust each other to do that work that we have identified as a gap, and we join in. And I want to just finally say thank you so much, everyone, for joining, but also thanks to the International Climate Initiative and the German Ministry of Environment, the funding for which the UN Environment Program delivers our Global Peatlands Initiative. Some of our assets are here. You'll see lots of content on our Peatlands Initiative website. The Global Peatlands Assessment, which was the first ever State of the World's Peatlands, that was delivered through more than 325 experts from around the world working voluntarily. Let me just say that, voluntarily. So giving their expertise and their knowledge to us because they believe that this activation that the Global Peatlands Initiative delivers is critical for the world. We have also the Global Peatland Hotspot Atlas, on online Global Peatland Map, and our virtual Peatland Pavilion. So wherever you are, please do stay well. Try to reach out, take that time in your day to connect, because it's going to only accelerate and improve our work together. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a great day.